As much as I know that losing is what's best for the Kraken right now, I still don't think I could ever pull myself to actually root against them. That having been said, if they can continue to lose and lose like they did in that game, I could find a way to be okay with it. Heck, I could probably even find a way to be borderline happy with it. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken fall in DC to the Capitals 4-2 in a game that was very close the entire way. And in fact, the Kraken really did play like the better team, and you could make the argument deserved to win it just based on the way they played, but they still managed to secure the 0 points in the standings, which is important for them at this point in time, as they are in a race to the bottom, or a race to the third to the bottom spot, with the first two tanks already far enough down the road that nobody has a chance of catching them. But for the Kraken, while losing is a good thing at this point in the season, it still would be good if they can at least put up a fight in those losses and take something from those games going forward into next season, especially for the younger players that are still trying to develop and learn in the NHL, get used to the NHL game and the speed of it. Which is not to say that guys like Matty Beniers, Shane Rader, Capo Caco, certainly, that have been playing very well, in fact those are three of the best players the Kraken have had for the last couple of months, aren't caught up to or used to the speed of the NHL game, but they're still early enough in their careers, especially Beniers and Wright, that every game of experience is valuable, especially when it's against a team as good as the Capitals have been this season, one of the two best teams in the NHL, the best team in the Eastern Conference, and to come out on the second half of a back-to-back, which, as we know, has been quite a bit of a struggle for the Kraken this season, and play that well against that team, and then still come out with a loss too. I mean, that's about the perfect outcome for the Kraken as far as the big picture is concerned. Now, yes, again, with this being the second half of a back-to-back, it does mean that the Kraken pushed their season record in second half of back-to-backs with this regulation loss to 0-10-0, which is downright terrible. And it would be kind of nice with one of the last two chances the Kraken have the rest of the way if they could at least pick up a point, if not one win, through the 12 second half of back-to-back games they had over the course of the season. But again, at least they played one of their best games in the second half of a back-to-back, maybe even their best. They had one other game on the second half of a back-to-back. They played close, but just came up a bit short. That is again the case here, and against a team like the Capitals. And in that vein, as we get into the game, with the only change lineup-wise for the Kraken being Decord obviously in net instead of Grubauer, second half of back-to-back and all that, and Decord's the starter anyway, so obviously it was going to be Decord. Everything else is the same, and for the Kraken, it's one of certainly the best first periods they've played all season long. Never mind just those 10 games. It's one of their best first periods of the entire season. And given the context of the team they're playing against being the best in the East, the second best in the NHL by record, it being the second half of a back-to-back, and everything else with the guys that they just lost at the trade deadline, I think you could make a good argument that this was the best first period that they have played all season long, as the Kraken absolutely dominated the Capitals all period long, from puck drop almost right to the end of it. They were all over the Capitals, spent the vast majority of the period in the offensive end, or at least heading towards the offensive end, if nothing else, and they got quite a number of grade A looks on the Capitals net. And really the only parts of the period that could have gone any better for the Kraken, who also did a good job of shooting the puck at the net. It was clear from the first seconds of the game that there was an emphasis put on actually shooting the puck at the net. I mean, pretty much the first possible opportunity the Kraken player had, it was Matty Beniers to shoot the puck. He did from well out, no screen, really not that much of a chance of it going in unless the goaltender just got out of the way of it. But it was made clear that the Kraken had that emphasis of shooting the puck, and they did a lot of it over the course of this period, which I have to say did make it a lot more fun to watch. I mean, it's fun to see the Kraken hold the offensive end and cycle the puck around and try to look for that very dangerous opportunity, basically the free goal. But it was a lot more fun to actually see them shoot the puck on the net, where there's at least a chance that a weird bounce happens, or, I mean, all the other reasons that we've talked about over the years with this team of just shooting the puck, trying to get a rebound, a screen, a tip, maybe the goaltender just lets in a bad one. Whatever happens, you're not going to score unless you actually shoot the puck. And again, the Kraken were doing that quite a bit and quite well over the course of this period, with some dangerous looks among those shots. So really, the only way this period could have gone any better for the Kraken would have been, one, if they had taken advantage of a few more of the golden scoring opportunities that they had over the course of the period, And two, if they had not allowed the Capitals to get a power play late in the period, I mean, right at the end of the period, the Kraken allowed the Capitals to have a power play to try to get back into things. But aside from that, there's really nothing to complain about. The Kraken do come up empty on their power play as well, so that's one of the opportunities that they could have had to score. But through all of it, they still do end up with the lead midway through the period. It's a 4-on-2 rush chance for the Kraken down the ice. The right line out there, along with Adam Larsson jumping up into the play. As they cross the blue line, it's McCann to Larsson. Larsson, a one-touch pass out to the side for Burakovsky. And then streaking down the middle, it's Shane Wright, who gets to the far side with his stick on the ice. Burakovsky finds it, and Wright just taps it in. No chance for the goaltender, and the Kraken take the 1-0 lead. Wright, his 15th of the season. And after going unfortunately scoreless in Philadelphia, he is right back on the score sheet here in this one. And although unfortunately that would be the only goal the Kraken scored in the first 20 minutes, they had at least two other great opportunities that should have ended up in the back of the net. Eli Tolvanen had one where he just gets absolutely robbed. He makes a nice move to get in front of the net, cross in front of, I think it was Lindgren in net for the Capitals, and he has him beat down and out, throws the puck at the net, and Lindgren's able to reach out and at least get enough of it with his glove, trying to kind of slam his glove on top of it to make the save. It does squeak past his glove, but he gets just enough to send it off of the post and then sliding across the goal line and out the other way. A bit different, but somewhat similar to the break the Kraken picked up in the early part of that game in Philadelphia with the puck that was just flung clean through the blue paint behind Grubauer. So I guess the puck luck comes the other way there on that Tolvanen chance that would have made it 1-0. Wright scores, and then a bit later the Kraken had a chance to go up 2-0 with what would have been an easy tap-in goal for Jordan Eberle on what turns out to be a 2-on-0 chance. I mean, not a completely uncontested one, but the two closest guys to the Capitals net at that point in time were Chandler Stevenson with the puck and Jordan Eberle. Stevenson tries to go across to Eberle for what again is just a tap-in goal if the pass connects. Unfortunately, he misses Eberle entirely, so that pass does not connect, and the Capitals dodge a huge bullet there. The Kraken don't take the multi-goal lead. Eventually, with just over 2 minutes left, sending the Capitals to that power play that turns out to be the majority of the Capitals' shots on goal of the period come in those last 2 minutes on that power play. Decord saves all of them, and at the end of the period, the Kraken are out shooting still the Capitals 14-7. I mean, going into that power play, I think it was 14-3, maybe 14-4. It was an absolutely dominating period from the Kraken against, again, one of the best teams in the NHL to this point in the season. Of course, with that being said, you knew that the Capitals were going to have a response to how that first period went for them. I mean, they just looked like they were sleepwalking through that first period out for a public skate. It looked like the Kraken were the team on a couple days rest, and the Capitals were on the second half of a back-to-back. Heck, maybe this was their third game in a row, the way that they played that period, just lackadaisical, lazy, passes weren't clean. The Kraken were intercepting pucks constantly, forcing turnovers. It was just a really uncharacteristically bad period for this team, the way they've played all season long. And that was definitely something that at least the Kraken broadcast was well aware of. Pretty much all they talked about during the first intermission, outside of how well the Kraken played, was that the Capitals were going to come out trying to respond to that first period early on in the second. And of course, that paired with the fact that, as we know, the Kraken have had their issues in second periods over the course of the season. It's been by far their worst period, maybe not by far. The first has not gone very well for them either. We've talked about that over and over again, but the second period has been the worst of the three. It felt like it was a recipe for disaster, and sure enough, right away to start out the second period, less than a minute in, the game is tied. After everything the Kraken did well in that first period, how dominant they had been, one bad transition the other way, and it really wasn't even necessarily all that bad, just a turnover inside the DC end of the ice, just inside their blue line. Beniers is shoved off the puck and then kind of held along the boards for just long enough where the refs aren't going to call it, but also just long enough for the play to get past him. And that allows one extra player down the ice. What looks like it's a 2-on-2, maybe 3-on-3. The last guy in is a Capital, and he is the one with Beniers still a stride or two behind him that gets the pass, a drop pass and a one-time shot. Decord, I mean, it would have been a very nice save for him to make, but he isn't able to make it, and the Capitals tie it 35 seconds into the second. At which point, I couldn't help but think, and even though the Kraken to this point had played 19, maybe 20 minutes of good hockey, while the Capitals had played maybe 1 minute of good hockey, Yeah, the only thought that was going through my head was, oh boy, here we go. And well, sure enough, just over 2 minutes later, the Capitals have the lead. This one is just they get into the offensive end, get set up, and it's Strom just kind of coasting along the blue line, eventually sees that he can no longer see Decord. There's just a whole bunch of traffic between he and the net, fires off the shot, and it gets through all of that traffic into the top corner of the net on the far side of Decord. With the absolute wall in front of him, there's no chance for Decord. He doesn't even know the puck has been shot until it's bouncing off the net behind him and the goal horn is going off. The Capitals have that 2-0 lead after everything, again, that the Kraken had done well. They're now not only not in the lead, they're behind. Still, to their credit, what's in the past is past, and from that point on, throughout the rest of the second period, the Kraken get back to their game, regain momentum pretty quickly after giving up the lead, and although it still wasn't quite as dominant a performance as the first period was, the Kraken control the second period pretty much the entire rest of the way, and eventually they do end up tying the game. It's Stevenson and Eberle again, this time a little bit more of a difficult play on a rush and not a 2-on-0. There's two players between Stevenson and Eberle, which kind of makes me wonder why he decides to pass this puck. Maybe not wonder why, but it's one of those plays where almost every time you're going to look at a pass that's broken up and Stevenson having given up an open shot to make that pass for a better play that just was not advisable. Somehow, some way though, this time he connects with Eberle, gets it through both Capitals players, and Eberle doesn't miss. Number 7's 7th of the season, his first goal since the end of October. October 24th is when he scored number 6, 8 games into the Kraken season, and then he went on a bit of a scoreless drought before eventually that injury that took him out for the majority of the season. And now his 4th, 5th game back, he's back on the score sheet with a goal. And the Kraken even things up through that collapse they had in the first few minutes of the second. And even better than that, or at least to keep things going in the right direction anyway, the Kraken do not give up control after tying the game. They continue to keep the momentum on their side, the ice tilted towards DC's end, and they don't really relinquish that momentum until midway through the third period, at which point they've had 3 more power plays, 1 in the back half of the second, and then 2 to start out the third. But as we talked about with the missed opportunities in the first period, well, the Kraken don't score on any of those power plays to take the lead as they continue to struggle on the power play, to say the least. It's certainly something that they're going to have to take another look at in this offseason and try to do something to get that figured out. It is just, well, it's certainly part of the reason the Kraken have struggled this year is that special teams have not gone their way. Not even the penalty kill has been good this year, and that, between the two special teams units, has been historically the one for the Kraken that is at least NHL average to maybe slightly better than. This season, they're flirting with the bottom third. Although even with that frustration over the power play and its performance or lack thereof, they at least did get some good looks on a couple of those power plays. They didn't give up any shorthanded chances, which is more than we can say for some stretches of Kraken power play over the course of the season. And it's also worth mentioning that as far as just entertainment quality of the game, one of those Kraken power plays came with 10 players in the 2 boxes combined. Well, it had been building for a while, but Tom Wilson doing Tom Wilson things over the course of this game, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really feel like that's something the Kraken had experienced in the previous 7 meetings between these teams. Tom Wilson just having one of those games where he's out there headhunting, trying to take out anything that moves. That certainly was the case as we got into the back half of this game. Certainly as we got into, I think, really the third period, but even late in the second, he was starting to lay some big hits, put Alexiak down on the ice with a bit of a hit behind Alexiak's back that he was not very happy about. Then he had a hit on McCann, had a couple of other ones, and eventually with the Kraken 4th line out on the ice, a hit on Mahura behind Decord, and the Kraken net is one too many. They've had enough. They go after Wilson and basically any other red jersey in their way. It turns into a whole big scrum, multiple different wrestling matches, guys getting pulled off of piles, Cartier getting pulled to the ice and then slammed into the ice, which is what ends up leading this all to turn into a Kraken power play. But through all of it, it takes the officials quite some time to get everyone separated and get the chaos dealt with. By the end of it, they just decide, you know what? We're sending everybody to the box. All 10 skaters go into the box, 5 for the Kraken, 5 for the Capitals, And because of that pulling Cartier down and throwing him to the ice, the Capitals get the extra penalty, and the Kraken get their, I think it was their fourth and final power play of the game. And it also led to some pretty entertaining pictures with the fourth line for the Kraken, as well as Mahura and Montour in the box. And then for the Capitals, you have Wilson in his line, as well as a couple defensemen in the box. Certainly a trade that the Kraken will happily take to send that fourth line into the box in exchange for any one of really the Capitals' forward groups. And yeah, I mean, losing Montour for a power play is not particularly ideal. So again, the Kraken don't score on that fourth and final power play opportunity. And unfortunately, as we get into the back half of the third from there, the Capitals at least are able to even up the game. They get one good flurry of chances in on Decord. He's able to come up with at least one pretty good save and a number of saves. I mean, a lot of them in tight, so kind of a sequence of good saves from Decord there. And then things are fairly back and forth, which at least for the Capitals is an improvement on how things have been going for the vast majority of the game, save for the first 3 minutes of the second period. And eventually it is the Capitals who end up breaking the tie. And once again, it's one that Decord really never has much of a chance on. It's a shot pass to the top of the crease from up by the top of the faceoff circle, maybe even closer to the blue line. Anyway, from pretty far out, Decord can barely see the shot coming as it is. Once again, a pretty effective screen in front of him. The Kraken not doing a particularly good job defensively of clearing things out in front of their own net. Otherwise, they were keeping shots to the outside, but things were getting pretty clogged up in front of Decord. We already saw the second goal for the Capitals go in because of a heavy screen that he couldn't see through. And then this shot, there's not only that heavy screen forcing Decord to lean out a little bit to one side, but then the shot pass to the top of the crease finds only a Capital stick, and it's redirected into the net behind Decord. Again, he's got no chance. The Capitals take that 3-2 lead. The Kraken try to push back, but aren't really able to make much of anything happen. Eventually pull Decord for the empty net. And as we saw in the game in Seattle, as soon as the net was empty, the only thought in any one of the Capitals players' mind was, get puck, give to number 8. That's what they do. He eventually hits the empty net, pulls himself to within 9 of breaking Gretzky's record with the empty netter, and further extends his lead on the record books as far as empty net goals in a career is concerned. And the Kraken end up falling by that 4-2 score. So again, in the end for the Kraken, it was a really well played game, a nearly full 60-minute effort from them. Pretty much just maybe the end of the first period where they give up that power play, but that's kind of the nature of a power play. The Capitals are probably going to get more chances there, but certainly the first 3 minutes of the second period is, I mean, ultimately what ends up losing the Kraken the game. Yeah, they give up the goal there at the end of the third that ends up being the game winner, but I mean, that was eventually going to happen one way or the other. And the Kraken otherwise absolutely dominated this game. I mean, honestly, weirdly enough, by just game flow, momentum, the chances the Kraken had, the third period might have been the worst of the 3 periods for them, and that is not something I think we could have said at all so far this season. They have been one of the best teams in the NHL in the third period, and one of, if not the absolute worst team in the second period, and also pretty bad in the first. They come out, have that incredible first period, just don't really capitalize on enough of the opportunities to get themselves far enough in the lead, so that when they do have that bit of a collapse, the Capitals have that response to the first period to start out the second. It ends up giving the Capitals the lead. The Kraken at least fight back again, as they've done all season long, to tie the game, and the Capitals, well, it's the way their season has gone. They find ways to win, and they did in the final few minutes of this one. But hey, at the end of the day, you know what? We got to watch some pretty entertaining hockey. The Kraken play a fantastic game, control a large portion of it, look dangerous and like a good, solid, cohesive team. Their passing was on point pretty much the entire game, except for the one pass that Stevenson missed to Eberle for the tap-in on the 2-0, but otherwise, for the majority of the game, the Kraken looked sharp, played really well against a very good team on the road on the second half of a back-to-back at the end of a road trip after losing some significant players and leaders at the trade deadline. You couldn't ask for a lot more. Shane Wright gets another goal, so your young players again playing pretty well. And yeah, unfortunately, Decord's stats don't look fantastic, and he does pick up a loss, which it's still dumb to me that gets pinned to the goaltender, but it does, so that's the one kind of bummer coming out of this. Kraken get the important 0 points in the standings to at least keep pace with the couple of teams they're trying to chase down to get higher up in those draft odds. The Sabres really doing a good job of tanking at this point. They've lost 6 in a row. At least the Predators, who the Kraken just artfully lost to recently. It was a frustrating loss, definitely, but very good for the Kraken in that race. They've been playing well enough that they might just jump ahead of the Kraken, and by that I mean the Kraken moving ahead of them in the draft order. And if the Sabres can pull together a couple wins, the Kraken do have a pretty tough schedule the rest of the way, so it's not out of the question that as much as it would kind of suck to end up being the third worst team in the NHL, it would also be kind of nice to be the third worst team in the NHL for the sake of the draft. And I mean, at the very least, you end up with a top 3 pick and some pretty good chances to end up with a top 2 pick, especially if I'm correct in thinking that Chicago can't win one of the top 2 since they've already won in the last couple of years. In the lottery, that is. There's some rules around that again, I'll look into as we get closer and that becomes more relevant. But yeah, the Kraken get just about everything they could have wanted out of this game, and for those that are interested in such things, Ovechkin scored again and also didn't do it on Decord, so he still has yet to score on Decord, I'm pretty sure. But with that, let's close things out here with the Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you do want to help decide the Kraken 3 stars after any Kraken game, the last few of this season and then going into next year, or help decide the channel awards for the team at the end of the year, you can help support a little bit more than you already are by watching at this point by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. As for the stars in this one, I think it's kind of dealer's choice. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments as far as what 3 stars you would have gone with. But for me, I'm going to go with the first star of the captain, Jordan Eberle. He continues to get back into the flow of things. Obviously, he's played enough games that he knows what the pace of NHL play is like and all that. But at the same time, it still takes some getting used to, especially coming back in the middle of the season after all of that time off. And there was clearly some rust to knock off, but he continues to get closer and closer to being back to the player that we saw through those first few games of the season, where he did put up the 6 goals in 8 games. He's not quite there yet, though maybe scoring a goal in this game is getting him closer to that, but it's good to see him pick up another one, get that 7th of the season, and even generally just otherwise played a great game. He had a couple of other pretty good chances in the first, had the one that could have been if Stevenson had just hit him with the pass. Then with the second star, again, I don't feel like there's any right answers here, but I am going to go with Shane Wright. Another fantastic game from him, scores another goal, 15th of the season, continues to put up points for the Kraken, and again, there's all sorts of guys you could have gone with here, and he just turns out to be the one that I feel like continues to stand out more consistently, really, than any other player, except for maybe Beniers in the last few games, but probably even more so than him. I mean, over the last couple weeks, or about a month now, Wright has been the best Kraken player, certainly by points production anyway, and it also helps that he's continuing to take some steps forward in the defensive part of the game, the back check, how he plays in the Kraken end of the ice, which has been a little bit more of a learning curve for him than it necessarily was for Beniers, but that's kind of that's usually how it goes for NHL players. They figure out the offensive part of things first, and then the defensive game catches up at some point if that's a part of their game, and it certainly is, or at least historically has been with Wright at other levels, and it seems like it's coming along. Just Beniers was a little bit of an outlier as far as the defensive end is the thing that he's figured out first, and the offense, it's come in bursts, and we'll see if that picks up once there's a few more threats in the Kraken lineup for teams to pay attention to, and it's not just all focused on stopping Beniers and his line. But anyway, with the third star, and this is a bit of a body of work over the last 2 games, but I'm going to go with Ty Cartier. He had, I would say, arguably a better game in the previous one, the first half of the back-to-back, where he scored the goal against Philadelphia and also played pretty well defensively. Just a great game from him in that first game back, and definitely, I think, forced the issue that he had to be back in the lineup for this game. And once again, played pretty well, had a couple of shots on goal. That fourth line had some good pressure among all of that Kraken momentum that they had throughout the course of the game, especially the first, 30-ish of the first 40 minutes. Actually, kind of 37 of the first 40 minutes, they had that pressure. And Cartier also definitely one of the first to mix things up physically, which was a big part of especially the last 30 or so minutes of this game with all the Tom Wilson hits, and there were some other Capitals players getting frustrated and trying to take advantage of some opportunities physically. And Cartier, as we know he's one to do, was quick to jump to the fence and jump into the scrum. And at least this time, he wasn't the one that went overboard and got called for the extra one, which has kind of been the one problem with him learning the physical part of the game, and that kind of, not enforcer in the traditional 70s style of enforcer where you're fighting 2 or 3 times a game. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. More the current version, which is kind of the Tom Wilson, laying big hits and then going to the defensive players whenever they need it. Cartier has gone a little bit over the top a few times and gotten some extra penalties at bad times. But at least in this game, he did everything right and even ended up drawing the extra call there at the end, even though the Kraken didn't end up taking advantage of it. Anyway, with all that said, let me know your thoughts again down in the comment section below about this game, the whirlwind of this last week. As maybe you can tell, I'm starting to get a little bit scatterbrained. It has been a busy last few days with 3 or 4 Kraken games, the preview to the trade deadline, then the trade deadline. One of the busier times of the year for the channel, and now we get a couple days off, which is much needed, but I appreciate you sticking with me, and until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.